Yes, indeed. Come on in, tell a friend. All black everything. We back. Appreciate you for checking this out. Thumbs up, like it, share, subscribe it. We back with the African music for meditation, core inspiration part two. How did I don't write this music? Back with that new series. We've been lied to. I'm just going off of some different stuff, just reading some very important documents and things that went down that we may or may not know about. I'm going to say that you don't because I just figured about it, you know what I'm saying? Figured it out, and was given the information. So that's what I'm going to do here and just share what I've learned. And we going to read about the King Booker T. Washington and his 1895 Atlanta Exposition speech and see what went down in it. And it starts, let's see, it was recreated in 1908, added to the National Registry in 2002. The essay is by Jacqueline M. Moore. And it says Booker T. Washington's 1895 address to Atlanta Cotton States and International Exposition is one of the most famous speeches in American society in history. Excuse me. The goal of the Atlanta Exposition was to showcase the economic progress of the South since the Civil War, to encourage international trade, and to attract investors to the region. Anxious to show there had been progress in race relations as well, the promoters invited Washington's, who had a reputation as a conservative black leader, to speak at the opening ceremonies. Little did they know he was going to give them this one. Washington gave his address on September 18th, 1895, before a predominantly white audience. On the surface, Washington did not disappoint the exposition's white promoters, stressing the importance of hard work and gradual progress for blacks. He argued that they should cast down their buckets where they were in agriculture rather than try to go into politics and make friends with whites who could help them. Indeed, some blacks later dubbed the speech the Atlanta Compromise, believing that Washington had compromised their civil rights unnecessarily. But to Washington, this was a compromise that cut both ways. He asked whites to also cast down their buckets and hire black workers rather than immigrants. He argued that by helping blacks, whites were helping themselves, as African Americans made up one third of the South's population and could do much help with its economic growth. Conversely, if blacks failed, they would be a significant deterrent to Southern progress. Thus, when Washington said in the full speech, quote, in all things that are purely social, we can be separate as the fingers, yet one as the hand in all things essential to mutual progress, end quote. Makes sense to me. He really saw himself as striking a bargain with whites to get their economic support in exchange for not challenging segregation. Moreover, he firmly believed that blacks would eventually gain political and social equality based on their economic achievements. The response to his speech in 1895 was overwhelmingly, positive among both blacks and whites. Recent Harvard PhD recipient W. E. Du Bois, then teaching at Wilberforce University, congratulated Washington in a telegram, calling his speech, quote, a word fifthly spoken, end quote. Washington soon in high demand as a speaker and became one of the best known black men in America. He parlayed this success into fundraising efforts, raising millions of dollars for black education in the South and his industrial trading school, Tuskegee Institute. White politicians began consulting Washington on safe appointees for traditionally black positions in government as a recommendation from the Wizard of Kentucky, Tuskegee, was a guarantee to whites that the candidate would have similar conservative views. Washington's influence was such that in 1901, President Theodore Roosevelt invited him to dine at the White House, and he became a key advisor to Roosevelt on social matters. But despite these improvements, most whites never followed through on their half of the compromise. Surprise, surprise. Black economic development at the turn of the 20th century was mainly a result of self efforts in the black community. Once again, talking about pull ourselves up from the bootstraps. That's all we do. Silly mother cluckers. Let's see. Self effort help. So excuse me of self help efforts in the black community rather than white investment. Moreover, Washington's assertion that socially they could remain as separate as fingers came on the eve of the Plessy versus Ferguson 1896 Supreme Court ruling that segregation was not unconstitutional. Not unconstitutional. So it's okay. Following the separate but equal doctrine that Plessy laid out, the southern states passed a series of laws completing a system of total segregation of blacks and whites. By the time Washington recorded his speech in 1908, his position had not gone unchallenged within the black community. Du Bois, for example, began to argue that economic equality would not be possible without political rights and saw segregation as robbing blacks of any dignity Washington hoped them to gain through economic achievement. Even Washington began secretly funding lawsuits to challenge segregation and loss of voting rights. Nonetheless, he continued publicly to espouse the ideas of the Atlanta Address, and it was not until after his death in 1915 that Du Bois' idea became those of the majority. Washington made this recording at a Columbia phonograph studio on December 5, 1908, during a trip to New York City. It was a small pressing intended for his private use to give as gifts, listed in the Columbia Acoustic Matrix series as catalog number 14605. The recording was a single sided disc, which could only hold about one third or around 320 seconds or 3 minutes and 20 seconds of the whole speech. What he chose to include was his introductory paragraph and the cast down your bucket metaphor with an abbreviated version of its lesson to both blacks and whites. Ironically, for such an important speech, Washington does not sound to the modern ear to be a particularly engaging speaker. He uses a somewhat monotone pattern of rising and falling intonation and speaks in a highly enunciated fashion. This latter aspect may reflect the standard practice at the time, given the poor quality of recording technology. Or it may be that he was at pains to prove how well spoken African Americans could be to whites who assumed blacks to have inferior intellects. This is the only known recording of Washington's voice and has been misdated in many sources. The explanation for this misdating is that the copy in the National Archives is not an original disc, but a reel to reel recording of a later radio broadcast of the speech. And either the radio announcer or the donor mistakenly noted the date of the first recording as 1906. However, the Columbian Master Book Discography, Tim Brooks and Ryan Russ clearly identifies it as being from 1908, a date further supported by the fact that Washington was in Tuskegee in December 1906. but was in New York in early December 1908, where he had access to a Columbia studio. In 1920, Columbia reissued a limited number of records under its personal label by request of the Washington family and sold the remainders to Broom Special Phonograph Records, the first black owned record label in the United States, which passed its company label over the Columbian label and offered it to the public. The record in its original form is extremely rare. Now, I don't know if you were aware of this speech here, but this was one of the most groundbreaking speeches in American history, obviously in Black American history as well. Just dropping a little information, spreading and sharing information that I've come across. Doing my part, all black everything. We've been lied to because we have been lied to. We just uncovering the mysteries. History will, what do you say? History will, something the mystery. I got to get it right. Dr. Smalls said it though. Professor Smalls. History will erase, excuse me, yes, history will erase the mystery. So we got to do our due diligence and, crack them codes that they done lied to us about and manufactured over the true history. But yeah, man, like and share, subscribe, and thumbs up. Like you're hitchhiking, you know how we do it. All black everything, think it's flight, big strange, many dreams. Or big dreams, many streams. Let's get it right. Peace and love, y'all. Do your own diligence.